was born in Detroit, Michigan. My career was as a psychotherapist. I studied at the University of Detroit Mercy for my undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate degrees. I was married to a wonderful woman for 14 years. We were happy, but I became discontented when I started coming out to myself at the age of 37. That eventually ended in a divorce. Interestingly enough, it was in the postgraduate school, which was for psychoanalytic psychotherapy, that they were teaching us how to cure homosexuality. And I wasn't out to myself yet, so that didn't sit well with me for some reason. Inside I felt churned up every time I would be in class or we'd be doing case studies about homosexuals. And it became so disturbing to me that it eventually led to my acknowledgement of myself as a gay man. It took well over a year for that to occur, but it did occur just to illustrate how I felt when I first came out. It was a miserable, miserable time. William Shakespeare had a sonnet 29. When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate. Wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope, with what I most enjoy contented least. Yet, in these thoughts, myself almost despising, haply I think on thee, and then my state, like to the lark at break of day arising from sullen earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate. For thy sweet love remembered, such wealth brings, that then I would scorn to change my state with kings. So in this sonnet, as you can see, in the beginning is a lot of torment, but in the end, with the recognition of love and having been so privileged to be loved in my lifetime, the sonnet then has an uplifting message to it. And I memorized that sonnet and I recited that sonnet both through my miserable times and during the good times which followed. My second marriage was to a wonderful man that I met through a mutual friend. He was living in Dallas, Texas, and I was still in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And we met on the telephone, and the very first time that we talked with each other, thanks to our friend introducing us, we talked for 4 hours straight on the telephone, and I knew then that this was a person of interest for me, and I think he felt the same way. So we commuted for about 4 months, back and forth. I would go to Dallas, he would come to Detroit. When he came for his first visit, I'll never forget that, he was a cowboy, he was in the rodeo, and I asked him to come in his cowboy drag, and lo and behold, he did. He came, got off that plane, he had a full cowboy drag, and we spent the weekend together in a gay resort at Saugatuck, Michigan, on Lake Michigan. And then in 2005, January 1st to be precise, of that year, Richard and I moved here to Panama City. By the way, those two cities are so far apart, culturally speaking, but What brought us to Panama City was the fact that Richard's brother and sister-in-law and their children lived here, and we vacationed here a number of times, and we really liked it. So when it came time for me to retire, I suggested that we move here because he had moved all the way from Texas and left his family and friends behind when he moved with me, and now it was his turn to have some relatives around him, so that's why we moved here. It's evolved over the 15 years that I've been here, 14 years that I've been here. At first it was culture shock, coming from liberal university town like Ann Arbor, Michigan, where we could more or less be who we were without fear, except of course in the traditional arenas of work life and so on. And when we moved here, we didn't know any gay people at all. After about a year, I said to Richard, we need to either do something about the gay community here, if there is one, we need to find it, or we need to move back to Ann Arbor, because I'm not going to live like this with just, surrounded by cisgendered people. Well, fortunately, we talked it over and decided to start a PFLAG chapter here in Panama City. PFLAG is an acronym for Parents, Family, and Friends of Gays and Lesbians. And so we joined with some other folks and did exactly that. And this year, practically in June, we will have been in existence here in Panama City for 13 years. And the LGBT community came out of the woods, came out from everywhere to be a part of PFLAG. The LGBTQ Center is very close to my heart. I've been working with the LGBTQ Center to form a center as a member of the founding board of directors for going on 2 years now. And the reason I'm so involved in it is that, number one, I believe in the mission, which is to, educate and spread the word that LGBTQ people are deserving of equal rights. And we provide a lot of services, support services. We have support groups, in particular the younger people who are coming forward, who participate in our weekly youth group. And those young people from age 13 to 18 are absolutely amazing to me. And so they renew my energy every single time I help facilitate the group. I feel proud that I was able to be in a very loving, monogamous relationship with my husband, Richard. I'm very proud of that. 17 wonderful years, and he died suddenly 7 years ago. And that was a rough time in my life. Humor to me is refreshing to the soul. So even in the darkest times, I try to think of humorous things. And one of the humorous things that I recall that Richard did was every year he wanted to go to nursing homes and dress as an Easter bunny at Easter time, and I was his assistant, and I would wear ears and carry a basket, and he would hand out goodies to the old folks in the old folks home. This one lady in the old folks home, she was in her 90s, I think, very old, lying in bed, and Richard hopped into the room and I tailed behind him. And she looked up at him and she yelled for the nurse and said, "Get this GD bunny out of here." And Richard turned around and hopped right back out. So, I miss his humor a lot, but all I have to do is think of memories like that, and I can laugh again, and I can laugh about it now. Eventually coming out to myself, I was 37 years old, so I was no spring chicken then. And it was hard for me to transition from a married to a woman person and leave that relationship, even though it was filled with love. But I was forced to leave it by my decision to try to become my authentic self. And in that process, I became relatively, very suicidal. And it was the one and only time in my life that I ever thought about taking my own life. That was a very sad and dark time, but a very life-changing time, because a friend of mine that I had hired as a therapist, he had moved to Washington, D.C., and I remember the night that I was planning to take my own life, and something made me dial Rick Collar up. And I did, I called him. And he stayed on the phone with me for 4 hours until my worst urges had passed. And to me, that was pure love on his part. And that was a pivotal moment for me. From that point forward, I never looked back. I only looked forward to being the best man, the best gay man I could. And that's what I still work at every single day.